Hello? Hello? Are we going live? Let's see. I can't really hear anything, so if you guys can hear anything, tell me in the chat. I'm going to wait for just a second. Can you guys hear anything? I feel like I'm going crazy. Okay, cool. Thank you for the confirmation. And thank you guys for the 75K celebration. I'm not very good at this sort of stuff, obviously. But I do wanted to reach out to you guys and just say, like, it's interesting to see how everything climbs up yet again and just to see how things spin around or whatever. So I'm very ecstatic that we've reached this milestone. The next milestone is going to be 100K, and then we'll have another live stream celebration where, we can just reconnect and talk and discuss whatever is going on or whatever ideas we want to explore and stuff like that. I've been really, really busy just because I don't know. I've just been kind of like trying to distance myself from the YouTuber sphere or the YouTuber path basically by just feeling like, I don't know, kind of like continuing the life that I should have had prior to starting YouTube and sort of like feeling the way I did before things took off. So I've been kind of busy in that front, as ambiguous as that was stated, but I still haven't forgotten YouTube and I very much enjoy it. So it's definitely a hobby for me, but consequently, the quality of videos that I want to make still suffers despite the fact that it's always suffered because I've always wanted to make it better. Anyways, um that being said as well, I also still want to like explore different ideas and concepts that we can kind of dissect together and see what possibilities there might be. And yeah, that's kind of my idea, I suppose. Nonetheless, I'm going to be reading the chat and seeing what kind of questions you guys are proposing and what kind of questions you guys want to ask regarding whatever subjects you guys want to discuss. Um, there's no out of bounds questions. If there happens to be a question that I don't really care to answer or that I just don't really feel like discussing, then I'm just going to ignore it. Um, Otherwise, feel free to chat amongst yourselves and talk about whatever and whatever, basically. Everything's fair game. So let's see. Thank you everyone. Thank you for the celebrations. Thank you for the compliments and all of that jazz. I feel like I look kind of rough just cuz I have been getting styes for no reason and also cuz I've been tired and running all over the place. Anyways, um Aw, Justin asks, "Can I pray for you in any way?" Of course, I always welcome those. It's very sweet. In fact, quick side note, going back into the topic of faith and religion, as nauseating as that is for some people to hear, including my former self, I suppose, although not really, because I didn't really care before. I was just very, like, apathetic. Anyways, there were a lot of people who were praying for me prior to me converting. So I was very appreciative of the fact that maybe their prayers did work. And I'm like, that's sweet. Let's see. Someone asked thoughts on the whatever podcast. I think I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think of it as sort of like a modern day digital Jerry Springer. So in the same way that I think anyone watching Jerry Springer would enjoy that sort of like popcorn, I don't know, low IQ entertainment, I too also enjoy that type of entertainment from time to time, but I do kind of feel bad for the people who go on it just because it is like a breeding ground of people who just have had the worst experiences in life and then think that that reality is true to life. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't normalize your pained perspective on life for others. Like it's just your own cross to bear. It's not anyone else's. Um, how'd you fall in love with ASMR? It's a good time for the backstory, right? I think I've already discussed the backstory though. But basically, I just always liked going to the doctor's office and getting my checkup. And it was my favorite part about going to the doctor. And then when I found out that it now has a new name or term, I started watching the videos and noticed that it was quite sterile. So I started making my own. Let's see. Who are my top 3 ASM artists? I have different categories that I place ASM artists into. One category being sort of like the lo-fi chaotic category that I tend to also belong to. And then the other category being ASM artists that I really respect and who I kind of tip my hat to. And, I'm just kind of like, "Ah, I wish I could be that." Um, Detail-oriented, I guess. In this category, the chaotic category, I really like Sarah Manganese, Phantasm ASMR, and I think that's about it, honestly. Oh, and I think Karuna Satori would probably fit into that category too. And then in the higher quality, not to say that they're lower quality, but it's more lo-fi, sort of like a la carte, going with the flow type of content. The ones that like really put in editing and different tech equipment into it and are like actually like building rooms around it and whatnot. I really love Pelagia, Dana ASMR, and Latte ASMR. Let's see. Why did you pick Orthodoxy over Catholicism? I still really like Catholicism, and I don't like denigrate it whatsoever. I really like Catholicism. However, I appreciate that Orthodoxy doesn't believe in the original sin and human beings being guilty of the original sin, where it's like we're all predestined to go to hell because of, Adam's sin. Instead, Orthodoxy believes like, no, Christ's sacrifice washed that from us. We're just sinful creatures because we're fallen, but because of Christ's sacrifice, all we have to do is turn to him and have his love inscribed in our hearts, and we're saved practically, pretty much. That plus their concept of the afterlife made more sense to me too, where your body will be resurrected with your spirit, but they don't quite know how that'll work. Their affinity with mystery and not having to necessarily rationalize every doctrine, where it's like having to make it intelligible to the world, instead just being like, there's a lot of things that humanity just won't know, at least not right now. Um, and their lack of trying to be more palatable to the secular world, where it's like they don't really care if they're, having to modernize for the sake of retaining or converting people. They just uphold tradition and say this is what it's always been and this is what genuinely gives comfort to people who need it. Um, and also their concept of the Virgin Mary, where she's not born sinless as Catholics might deemed to be like insanely disrespectful, but rather she was born a normal human being but chose not to sin, which I think respects the fact that she was that good, where she just chose not to, I guess. I think if someone's incapable of sin, then it kind of makes them this sort of mystical creature. Meanwhile, if someone chooses not to sin, then that's more testament to their character. So that's kind of my rationale over it. Do you ever plan on upgrading your video quality? Love your videos, mucho love. I want to desperately, like I really do. I just I don't know, I just kind of always run off the edge of my seat, I suppose. Um, Favorite Bible verse slash verses. I don't know, it depends. I tend to like a lot of Romans just because it predicts what's going on nowadays, likewise with Jeremiah. Um, Bible verse. I'm not very good with verses. I just know quotes, and then I have to Google what part of the Bible it came from. Proverbs too. But yeah, that's about it. I don't really have like I'm not good with verses. I've never really been good with verses. I just know the parts in the Bible, and then I have to re-Google them to find out where they were from. Who are your favorite YouTubers? Um, Ruby Granger, I really like. Cozy Katsune, I've liked for a while. Um, I think that's all that can come to mind. Question: as a Jehovah's Witness, I always found your old videos hilarious, even though I could feel the aggression. Now, with the Christian awakening, do you still view us negatively? I don't view Jehovah's Witnesses as negatively as I did when I was an atheist. Mostly because as an atheist, there was a lot of like resentment that I had. Now with Orthodoxy, I kind of view all Christians as being brothers and sisters, but it really just depends on what is, as previously mentioned, inscribed on their hearts, because that's all that Christ looks at pretty much. Um, However, with the Jehovah's Witness doctrine, that was something I always had an issue with, and that was the reason I left, was because it wasn't for any like social reason, because I really, soldiered through that. It wasn't for any sort of like, um, I don't know, cheap or, superficial reason. It was more so just things didn't add up for me. And I won't go too into detail over it because at the end of the day, it's your faith. You decide if that's a mindset or a perspective that you might develop on your own. But yeah, I don't view it as negatively as I did before. There's definitely no resentment in my heart. Um, I just kind of see it as not an apostolic church is pretty much my perspective. Let's see. Do you like Whisper Soft? There's so many different variations of certain names that I can't tell which YouTuber you're talking. So I don't know if I do. Like, I don't know. Names of YouTubers where they sound so similar to other names of other content creators. And I'm like, I don't know if you're referencing the one that I think you're referencing. So I'm just not gonna comment. Oh, it dropped me all the way down to the bottom. Astrology ASMR, please. I'm probably going to stay away from astrology at least, just because I do love the celestial bodies and I do love like, the universe and stuff like that. But I don't know, I kind of got into it where I was like, yeah, I kind of got into this whole rabbit hole around Babylonian mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all repackaging the same themes, Egyptian mythology, and then astrology also being a sort of like cosmic mockery of different themes. And I kind of got into it. So I'm like, once I figure out an angle to make a video where it's not like praising it or encouraging it, but rather just sort of dissecting it in my own way, I guess, then I'll consider making more content like that. Is a second book coming, Angelica? It might be actually, yeah. There's been plot lines kind of coming to my mind. I just have been kind of like organizing it a little bit, but I think there might be. Let's see. Oh, it dropped to the bottom. Congrats. Oh, JC Introduction says, congrats, but to piggyback on what you said, yes, when you accept Christ into your heart, you are deemed saved, but your actions on daily basis still has to represent that. Yeah, exactly. I believe that too, where it's not just by faith alone that you're saved, because even the devil believes that Christ exists, but rather it's the actions that come from your heart that also kind of reflect that Christ-like behavior. Um, Typically, whatever nature your heart has is represented by the actions you take. So, if there's actions that you take that kind of reflect sin, whether it be pride or gluttony or whatever deadly sins there might be, wrath, then that's something to reflect on to see where exactly you might be having influences that might not be the healthiest. Let's see. That's funny. The YouTube pundit says, the YouTube algorithms just recommend me your content completely out of the blue, and it amazes me how you're the only ASMR creator that I get recommended, even though I've never really followed it. That's funny. I get that a lot, which I'm very flattered by, but I'm like, it's funny to me. Let's see. Let's see. Mr. This is going to be very like religious, I can tell, just because every single question seems to be either ASMR related or religious related, and I'm like, I welcome it, but yeah, welcome the whole Bible study is in session, I guess. Um, Mr. JOJ says, "What made you turn back to God? Any specific event or a culmination of multiple factors?" Um, it just made sense. I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's just like a series of arguments where, I guess to summarize it, it's like if you follow any ideology to its furthest extent, which means that you're just being honest and not imposing your own individualist ego into whatever arbitrary line you decide to draw in the sand, because that in itself just reflects your own will, which not everyone is going to follow. Otherwise, you're like treating yourself as a godhead. Um, then you start to notice a pattern where, if, for example, communism, where they have this thought control, this collectivist mind control locked in, where, if there's a policy instated and it's supposedly for the people and it's supposed to be instated by some, I don't know, elected group of people's democratic of whatever, or by this figurehead who's beholden by that group, or either is the leader of that group, however it's organized. Um, and then they start to rationalize how many people now have to die in order to uphold or be reprogrammed or re-educated, quote unquote, to uphold this policy. I started kind of thinking, well, then you can't criticize a Catholic monarchy for having a spiritual level to that. Because if you only have a materialist perspective where you uphold this like communist policy, then you can rationalize a higher amount of deaths, which is historically true, than that of a religious group, particularly Christianity, which has valued life as being the bedrock of their religion. I think I might be explaining it quite poorly, just because it was like a long series of arguments that just kind of like added up into this ball that just kind of turns me back to Christianity by honestly counter arguing each other until they all just kind of like added up to Christ, as best and succinctly as I can put it. Excuse me, I also have a cough. I've been sick for like a little while. Anyways, do you play Minecraft? Sometimes I've been getting into it. I never really played it when I was a kid, but a friend of mine introduced me to it, and now I'm like sometimes playing it. Um, any bands or artists you'd recommend? Um, I kind of like the Oh Hellos now. Um, excuse me. But I haven't really been into anything new, honestly. Like my life recently has just been very boring, and I quite like that, where I'm not so into the loop of having to constantly figure out new things and find out new rabbit holes, but rather just kind of contently trying to sort of resurface into a more normal state, I guess. Basically binge watching Gilmore Girls. So anything that Gilmore Girls references or any music that plays is what I would recommend. Let's see. Oh, so when you made JC Introduction says, "Oh, so when you made those videos on your other channel, you believed those religions at the time. I thought it was to use religion as an algorithm to reach different audiences." No, I was very atheist for like 7 years. Very atheist. Um, but something I didn't like about atheism is that the presupposition of atheism is that you believe that pretty much like 7.5 billion people on Earth are wrong, and that somehow you belong to the select group of people who have just thought their way out of a entire human history of believing in God. And I kind of thought that was disrespectful, where I still didn't believe in God just because I didn't have that spirit. I was just very numb. But I also thought it would be arrogant of me to not understand these different religions and respect their faiths. So I would learn about them and, attend their temples or their, you know, whatever, and see what they were about. But then I started developing criticisms and just kind of seeing how they didn't add up. Like, I like Buddhism, for example. I really like Buddhism. It's very relaxing. But I kind of also thought, well, they kind of don't have an answer for the reason that children exist, because children are just seen as an attachment to the material world, an illusion or distraction rather. And that if you're way too attached to your child, it's like this animalistic instinct that will bring you down to the animal realm. And I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't really facilitate humanity's existence, because if you're getting sort of looked down upon or not seen as spiritual enough because you decided to have children, then the ideal in that scenario is no one, ideally in that scenario, religiously having children, which defeats the whole purpose as to why human beings exist in the first place. Christianity, on the other hand, specifically says, that life is to be lived, that it's a gift to us, that it's a blessing, that it's a miracle for us to exist on in earth, in a universe that was created for us, and that our entire purpose is to basically tend to and take care of the nature around us, the animals around us, to live in that sort of like upbuilding, service oriented perspective. Our fallen state comes with the fact that we tend to make it very difficult for each other to be in that service oriented state, so it's something that you constantly have to work through and then turn the other cheek on to practice remaining in that state, knowing that it yields more blessings than curses, even though it does have some suffering to it. Um, Tilo Turner says, is it bad when people lie about being Christian? I've always thought, yeah, even when I was an atheist. I kind of thought it was disrespectful. Like, I don't know, I just think falsity in general is annoying to me. I don't like it. I like it when people are genuine and actually open-minded, where if you dislike something, you have to explain why it is that you dislike it, and then remain fair-minded to someone, a well-intentioned disagreement. However, is can't even explain why they dislike what it is that they dislike, and they're trying to beat you over the head with their perspective, and they expect you to be open-minded, but they themselves are closed-minded, and they think that their perspective is, like, unquestionable. I tend to get annoyed by people like that. And those tend to also be the people who, as Vaush notably exemplifies, along with other people of his ilk, um, those tend to be people who justify antisocial or sociopathic behavior because they think that they themselves are always morally correct, as if there's some sort of God figure, and that their evil acts or dishonest intentions or dishonest tactics are justified by just willing it, basically. And I can't stomach being around people like that. It's maybe bad on me just because I'm supposed to be, I don't know, I guess less, I don't know. But yeah, I can't be around people like that. It just annoys me very badly. Yo, biggest question from a fan: Messi or Ronaldo? I'm gonna say it's not for the, good looks of it or whatever. I really love Messi and his relationship. This is like a girl answer. I really love Messi's relationship with his wife. And I really love how he treats younger boys. Same thing with Ronaldo. He treats young boys great, like they both do. But I don't know. I think Ronaldo's just more impressive. Like, this one jump that he made where it was, like, 8 feet up in the air, and then he still scored a goal by just kicking his head in against the ball or whatever. I just find Ronaldo's more impressive. Plus, his stance on the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I also quite like. Oh, no. Ah, I ended up jumping all the way down to the bottom again. Okay, I'm gonna start from here, I guess. Let's see. Mo says the comedic and unhinged personas are always the best. Can't wait to be transitioned into a black woman all over again. Definitely. We transitioned Kanye West on my old channel to an Austrian man. And then on this channel, we transition you into a black woman. All I ever do is live to serve different ideas. Let's see. Have you ever seen or heard of the Westboro Baptist Church? I think everyone has. Plus, I always liked, and ironically, I ended up watching a couple of clips from Russell Brand's interview with them. And I don't know, they're just kind of like cartoonish. That being said, my opinion when it comes to pretty much any Protestant denomination is that it's always founded for some political movement. It was never founded as an apostolic church that came back all the way down to Christ, but rather Anglicanism was just, hey, Henry VIII wanted a divorce. Or Lutheranism was basically just, hey, priests wanted to get married. Um, and also secular or nations wanted to secularize themselves so that way they could create nation states outside of the Catholic hold, outside of the Catholic, the Pope's jurisdiction or whatever. They wanted to disregard God's will and just kind of become gods themselves. And then consequently, because of now this different rise in constant denominations popping up around Europe and then the United States and now globally, you now have this fracturing of political turmoil, wars, and then no one seeing eye to eye anymore. Having a common. Dupe Carter says you were atheist for sure or agnostic. No, I was atheist for sure. I was. I didn't believe that there was a higher consciousness. I didn't believe that there was some, higher knowledge above us. I just thought everything that you think, everything that you see and touch is real. And anything that is, just sort of this out of the world, invisible force is can be explained through through material reasonings or explanations. Then I started to notice how stupid that is. And then I didn't become agnostic because I couldn't quite believe in God just because I wasn't there yet. But then I just started pursuing Christianity, and then through Christianity, I understood the nature of God, and then I became Christian. I was never agnostic, like at all, at any point. Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita? I read passages from it. Aw. Squid You Know says, I went to an Orthodox church for the first time this Sunday because of you, Angelica. That's very sweet. That's actually like really, that's high praise. That's actually like a really nice compliment. Thank you. Jose Martinez says, Hola, ¿me mandas un saludo? Hola. Let's see. Tilo Turner says, as a Christian, aren't other religions scams? I wouldn't call them scams. I feel like that's too capitalist. It's kind of like too sketchy car dealer tainted. I would say it's more incomplete, I guess. And it can disturb the spirit in ways that people might not notice, I guess. But at the same time, everyone has their path, everyone has their mode of figuring out the world. So I'm like, peace be unto you, and then, I'll mind my own path. Let's see. Ray Ray Candy Sweet says, "Did you have fun on the Whatever podcast?" It was nice. It was definitely interesting. Um yeah, it was just like people not really talking as people, basically. Oh, it jumped down to the bottom again. Okay, let's see. Howard the Duck says, "I like your video essays, Angelica. Is it possible to oppose the cultural subversion destruction perpetrated by the left, but not hold a biblical worldview?" Technically, yes. That was kind of like the whole argument that the Spanish made during their civil war between the communists and the right wingers, where there was the monarchists who wanted to uphold the Catholic monarchy perspective, where they just wanted to make sure that the Pope, along with, whatever figurehead were in charge of the kingdom. Meanwhile, there were more pragmatists who thought that that was not necessarily the most realistic or, feasible, which, you can argue either way. They were the phalanges, and then they were the ones who were more secular in their mindset, where they were kind of like, I guess, materialist in their perspective, where it's not just what's good for the church, but what's good for the nation and the people. So I think you can have a more, not necessarily entirely secular, because secularism will just yield to leftism, but you could have less of a religious stake and still subvert the left, but I would argue just temporarily. I think the closer you get to Christ, the more you subvert a lot of these different deceptions, like, I don't know, like this crony Republican neoconservative party, I guess, to throw out buzzwords, and also this crony Democratic Party, and also this sort of like, I don't know, this religion of self that you see on both sides, I guess. Um, Al New 40 says, "If you'd like to discuss, what's your take on Israel-Palestinian conflict?" Um, well, if I'm not mistaken, 80% of Christians who are Orthodox live on the Palestinian side, and Israelis target Christians heavily, where in the 1960s, I think it was, they started attacking their churches and assaulting Christians on the streets to a point where a lot of them fled to the Palestinian side. So, yeah, I'm not going to side with Israel, and also the idea that Israel gets universal education, universal healthcare on American taxpayer dime. Meanwhile, Americans are struggling to even buy a house, which is literally the sign of a middle class society. And if the middle class disappears, all you're going to get is poverty, which breeds degeneracy. Not entirely, but yeah, more people are going to be addicted to alcohol, drugs. They're going to be more hedonistic, trying to take whatever indulgences that they can to cope with their reality. I'm like, it doesn't seem like it's done on accident, is my point. So yeah, I'm very much on the Palestinian side. However, I do also have my criticisms of Islam, which is predictable to have as a Christian, but very much on the Palestinian side. And I think that they are being Palestinians as like an ethnicity, and it won't just stop at Palestinians. It will continue to bleed in throughout the Middle East, including Egypt, um, Iran, all of it. Um, they're gonna be pretty much, if Israel has its way, I can't quite say the word. I don't know if, YouTube will allow it, but yeah, they're trying to wipe them out essentially. And then they're playing the victim and thinking that the majority of Israelis, quote unquote, live in the United States. They cannot be wiped out in that respect. But Palestinians, not so much. Let's see. Joshua says, please do Twitch streams again. I was loving the Beatles house build on Sims and the Jubilee reactions. I might start up a Twitch again. I did love Twitch. I just need to figure out how I can fit it into my schedule. Um, Time management is definitely a skill I'm building up, and I'm very happy that my life is a little more regulated. But yeah, it'll come. It'll definitely return, but we'll see when. Let's see. Thoughts on Scientology? Interesting, fascinating, absolutely bonkers, but it's just so funny and interesting. Sometimes I think about taking the Scientology personality test, but then they'll have my information, which I don't feel comfortable with because I don't want like the squirrel busters coming at my door and like harassing me. But I don't know. It's just so interesting to me. It's like you think about thinking, and it's like, okay, enough, enough. Julian Sunny says Protestant sola scriptura. My interpretation is right. Yours is right. Everyone is right. Yeah. Protestantism, like the whole sola scriptura creed, I guess, is pretty much just atheism blanketed with the Bible, where it's like your idea of God is ultimately whatever you deem as being your moral compass, but it doesn't actually trust tradition, history, and like a greater context that makes the Bible make sense. I think a lot of people can't make sense of the Bible, especially in the United States, because there's no context for it on purpose, where it's just meant to be sliced and diced for whatever denomination to make use of it. But it wasn't always that way. Let's see. Black Crayon says, when you were converting over, did you have any fear or worry about what people may think about you in real life or online? No. Being raised a Jehovah's Witness, they have the whole like culty shunning thing. So I could always tell who would be the type to shun me based off of a difference in worldviews and who would be the type to just say bygones be bygones, we disagree, but let's share a cup of tea or whatever. And I always kind of have that perspective all the time, every day of my life. I can kind of see who's that type of person and not. And even if I didn't guess someone being that way, and they turn out to be that way, it really feels like no loss to me. So yeah, the people that I knew would have an issue with my change in worldview, I wanted to directly want to collect them. I didn't want them around me, whether it was online or in person. I didn't want them anywhere near me. It's like the whole, oh my God, you're triggering me. It's like similar vein where it's like you remind me of the people that I grew up with who would shun you just because of a difference of worldviews. And they thought that they were so morally correct that they took on this sort of like Pharisee righteousness over you, where it's like there was this condescension and this right to just gossip and mock you constantly within the Jehovah's Witnesses. And when it comes to people like that, I don't see them as people. I see them as vessels for ego and social approval that I don't really care for. They're not like people to me, basically. When it comes to people who are more like bygones be bygones, let's see where we agree, let's see where we don't agree, let's be friends, let's talk about lighthearted concepts or topics, and then also see, deeper matters of the heart or whatever. Those people stayed. I'm still friends with a lot of people that I used to be friends with before I converted, and yeah, everything kind of just worked out the way I thought it would work out. Like there was no surprises at any point. Um, oh, let's see. I jumped down to the bottom one on this one. Nick Cara says, in high school, I became close with an Egyptian Christian woman who tutored me in math. She told me about her visits to Jerusalem and how poorly Christians were treated by the other religious authorities. Yeah, pretty much. Like, basically, under Muslim law, there's like 4 tiers, I think, of how Christians are treated when Muslims take over a country. Tier 1 is basically they offer you the option to convert. If you don't take that, then fine. Then you pay an extra tax for not being Muslim, but you can't preach your religion. You can practice it in private and quiet, but you can't preach it. You can't make it a public, thing. You can't influence anyone else, but you do have to pay that tax and you can do it in private. If that doesn't work for you, then there was like a punishment to it. I can't quite remember what, but they'll punish you over it, and then if it gets to an extreme point, then I think they decapitate you. I think those are the 4 tiers. I might be mistaken, but I think those are the 4 tiers. With a certain other Abrahamic religion, um, that's not the case. It's very much just kind of like everyone else who's not literally that group is seen as a problem. Like, they are cattle, basically. And I'm like, especially Christians, since, and also Muslims, I guess, since they believe in a Messiah. Actually, I don't think the Muslims believe in a Messiah. I don't think Muhammad is their Messiah. I could be so mistaken on that, though. But I don't know. I've always had that kind of fuzzy in my head. Um, let's see. All New 40 says, currently I no longer use medication. I stopped when I was in a good mental place to do a friendship that ended. Due to a friendship that ended, I now cope with exercise and planning. Honestly, all applause to you. That's amazing. That's like literally awesome. That's like a great celebration right there. Exactly. I think that it's a cliche and it's something that people like to dismiss, but sunshine, getting out, having a routine, going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time, organizing your day at least the best that you can, um, just basically socializing, having an optimistic, idealistic point of view where, if someone does you wrong, you turn the other cheek. That'll definitely help you feel real. It'll definitely help you see the beauty in the world. And you won't feel so lost inside your head anymore because you'll be interacting with others. YouTube pundit says, "Oh no, Scientology. If there's one group I wouldn't mess with, it's them. Even if I get an ad for them, I turn it off." That's funny. It's so true. It is so true, but it's funny. Let's see. Chicken Tendy says, "Will you be doing more streams in the future?" Yes, I will be. There'll be a 100K celebration live stream. I intend to do a live stream every 25K followers or subscribers rather. Um, just to kind of like archive it and have fun with it and see how things go. But maybe I might start a Twitch as well. We'll see though. We'll see. I enjoyed it, but we'll see. Um, let's see. Moist Salt says, "Having a routine is exactly why I'm going to college. It's going to help me so much more. That's why I think I felt better in high school than in adulthood." Yes! 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 Literally, like, whether it be college, work, anything that has a schedule to it. I think that when it comes to retail jobs, it becomes so rough just because they don't give you a predictable schedule. Human beings love, like, their nervous systems love predictability, routine, structure. They love it. It's what makes them feel alive. When it comes to unpredictability, when it comes to all of these different, like, more chaotic elements, it'll make you so lost inside of your own feelings and mind that nothing will feel real anymore outside of just your ruminating thoughts that never stop. And even then, it's like you can't even remember or recall anything that you thought or were or said or whatever a week ago. It becomes very hard. Hack joke says Trinity or monotheist. That's funny. Um, the way I understand the Trinity, even though the Jehovah's Witnesses never believed in it and they condemned it, but the way I understand the Trinity actually helped me believe in God. Where, in the same way that human beings have a mind, a soul, and a mind, a soul, and a physical body, likewise, God is also three parts where Christ is the physical form, then there's the Holy Spirit, and then there's the mind, quote unquote, which is the Father. So it's all one. But in the same way that human beings can't be summarized as just being one being, but rather we're multiple parts of a being, um, then that's kind of how you get that, where it's kind of an explanation of existence, but it's not three in one. It's just one. So that's my idea. Is the Earth flat? I I'm not gonna lie to you, Earth, all of this jazz sort of theories. I've never thought of it as being worth anyone's time. Granted, if people wanted to get into the whole hollow earth or flat earth theory and start like dissecting that, I am curious to like their arguments and why they think that, but it's just not like a big deal to me. I just don't care. I like stars. That's kind of my obsession, but that's about it. I guess my equivalent of like people being like flat earthers is me being obsessed with like how human beings throughout all of time have looked to the celestial bodies for answers and predictions of what's to come, and then God literally being like, "Don't do that. You're gonna just basically create this chaos." And then people creating the chaos and then making gods of the chaos and then worshiping the chaos. It's all that's kind of like my sweet spot, I guess, of researching and figuring out all of that jazz. Kaz says, "What are your thoughts on how Gwen getting bullied and even by some Christians?" I really I don't know. It's like there's Christians who we all have flaws as human beings, and Christians are no different. But yeah, I do think that Christians who have this Pharisee mindset where they're blaming any woman for their own lusts is exactly what Christ literally described when he says, if you look at a woman with certain intentions to gouge their eyes out, or when, the Pharisees came along and they tried stoning Mary Magdalene, and he says that he without sin cast the first stone. Like every time, like Christ literally came down to defend the fallen woman. That's why he says that righteousness, I think it was in Isaiah, he says that righteousness is like used menstrual rags, where it's like, congratulations, you've lived a righteous life. You have the fruits of your labor, of your discipline. You have, the value of the fact that you've never strayed. But the idea that you would measure someone else against your own stick is like, look at the plank within your own eye. And the best example you can have of that, as Orthodoxy has already covered, is like Saint Mary of Egypt, who was this woman who sold herself to men to pay for her pilgrimage to this church, I think in Jerusalem. And she felt this invisible force kind of prevent her from walking in because she hadn't yet washed herself of the sins that she had collected. So then she washed herself of the sins. She internally made her reckoning with God, and then she was allowed in. And you don't necessarily have to do what she did to reckon yourself with God, but that's just what she internally felt like she needed to do to kind of like reckon with her past. However, I don't know, it's like, how well versed of a Christian are you if you don't see the hypocrisy of condemning a woman who's genuinely made a difficult decision, or a decision that most people wouldn't make, which is to sacrifice a lot of the material world, to sacrifice a lot of your wealth, to sacrifice a lot of this um, status to follow Christ? It's like, I don't even think most boomers would sacrifice their wealth truly to follow Christ's will outside of just their perceived righteousness, essentially. They think that following Christ brings wealth, but in her case, following Christ has cost her wealth. So that's kind of my thought on it, where I'm like, I'm sure Gwen takes it in stride and understands that it's a part of being Christian, is being bullied or being ostracized even by other Christians. Um, but I kind of think of it as being this interesting illogical puzzle, basically, where I'm like, you mock leftists for being so emotional and for being so out of touch with reality, but yet look at your behavior now. It's kind of my perspective. That's funny. Yaksha Stardust says, thoughts on atomic bombs, especially in Japan, as in like Nagasaki being a hotspot for hidden Christianity, and then after the world is after the world war is ended, the US decides to, for no reason, drop a bomb on Nagasaki. I do have my thoughts on it. I will not be revealing it, but I do have my thoughts on it. Oh, I dropped to the bottom again. Empathic Design says, do you celebrate Halloween? I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that one. Technically, it's All Saints Day, but yeah, I just haven't read enough about it. I don't go with the whole Protestant sort of like, oh, it's a pagan holiday where you worship the devil and you offer, gifts to the spirits to placate them. I think Protestants have this like constant fear about paganism because their faith is not necessarily rooted in a peace with Christ, but rather in a fear of the world. Hence why they also tend to practice like, this sort of you have to live by this standard and this measure of the rule, or otherwise you're fallen and you've ruined yourself and you're a threat to the rest of the church. And then vice versa, the reactionary Christians, the progressive Christians being like, everything's okay, even if you sell out every Christian value. We also welcome atheists, even though that makes no sense. So yeah, um, I still need to do more research around that. But at the end of the day, I'm like, whatever the church says about it is what I'm just gonna default with. Tito Lopez says, can you expand on Protestants being atheistic blanketed with the Bible? Basically, when you have only faith in the Bible, what you're basically saying is that whatever your personal interpretation of the Bible is your religion. So, number one, it's literally said in the Bible, don't rest on your own understanding. But number two, that's how you get into territory where people very easily cherry pick, where it's like if you don't like something of the Bible, then you can easily twist it in a way that'll fit your narrative or your agenda or your perspective or ignore it. And then if you like something of the Bible, then you can just run with it, basically. So you're basically using the Bible as a cover to justify your own personal interests and your own personal perspectives. Hence why I do think that Protestantism is basically the branch of Christianity that just is like a personality test where it's like MBTI, it's like, what Christian denomination are you? Baptist, Methodist, whatever. It's like, oh, you have, some trauma in your country or in your family. Oh, you're Pentecostal because they tend to promote this sort of like emotional impulse, sort of like, you must be in this sort of like constant bonding on this super deep level or whatever. Or, oh, do you wanna just have, like, this progressive sort of, like, everything's valid sort of thing? Then you're probably Episcopal or Methodist or whatever. So, yeah, that's kind of my point of view. Tito Lopez is really hitting with some nice questions. Thoughts on C.S. Lewis? I really like him. Him and J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm like, they weren't people that I was quite interested in as a child. I really liked Narnia and Lord of the Rings as a kid, but not to like the way that other people can get quite obsessive over it. But I think I'm starting to feel like a soon to be obsession with them striking me soon. What do you do to deal with burnout? Ow, my legs, they're hurting. I had them crisscrossed applesauced. Um, Usually I just kind of, I don't know, watch Gilmore Girls, go to the gym, take things kind of lightly, um, take a walk through a nature preserve, like literally something that's light and relaxed, but you're still engaged with is the best cure for burnout. I think if you just kind of go into that zone where you clock out and you're just kind of like Kubrick staring at a wall, um, it's gonna make it worse. Because then it's all you're gonna do is just ruminate on it and then think of all of the things that you're supposed to do, and it's gonna burn you out even more. Because if you're in a state of burnout, then all you're thinking of is all the things that you're supposed to do. But if you do something that's quite, well-paced, light, sort of smooth, beautiful, it kinda distracts you in a healthy way, then you can kind of restart and then navigate through the day again. So, yeah, that's kind of my idea. Lilia McCurdy says, "New thoughts on substances since converting." I think they're just distractions. That's about it. I think that, there's a nature of attached to most substances, if not all substances, that lead people to these, like, religious experiences, but at the end of the day, I think it's just a distortion of reality, and I think that they're ultimately quite harmful. Like, even alcohol, and I would even wager, to sound Mormon, coffee, just because, I don't know, they just have negative effects on your body, on your health, and although in moderation, you can argue for some of its use, I'm not gonna be puritanical about it by any measure, because like, whatever, but I don't think that they're the best to consume, just because I think they're meant to prey upon whatever vices or whatever is going on in your psyche, I guess. Let's see. Elia Everett says, "You are open to the idea of Earth being flat?" My point is, I don't care what shape the Earth is in. If they were like, "Oh," like, literally, if they said tomorrow, "The Earth is a pyramid," like, it's literally the shape of a triangle, but 3D, I honestly will not care. Like, I won't have an emotional response to that. I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I don't really care." Like, I just don't. Like, that's why I'm like, it's never been something that interested me. Moist Salt says, "Do you work outside ASMR?" Yes. Yes, I do. Yes. I enjoy it. I like having multiple things going on at the same time. I don't like being sucked into one gear because that's not the best for your mental health. Jake Maddox says, "What are your thoughts on college? I got my degree, but now I work for my family in a completely different field and always thought it was a waste of time." I've always loved education. I'm a huge, like, I always thought that education should be based off of, like, understanding Latin and Greek so that you could understand most words that are gonna be discussed, that way you could understand how our society was formed, on classical on history, understanding how, societies are built and how different, systems of government operate, but unfortunately our entire educational system, pretty much from like middle school, I guess, all the way up to college, is riddled with this like faux moralism that distorts historical facts. It's like history is written by the victors, and the victors are moronic in our society. So I can't stomach them. Like education to me is like a sad excuse in this world. I love education, but it's just not like our idea of education and where you get it, you usually have to do more studying just to sparse out what is true and what is false. And that's what sucks about it, where it's like, I wish I could just trust you to give me the knowledge that I want, as opposed to having to figure out what it is that you're trying to BS me with and what actually might lead me down a more honest and structured, like, what's the word where it's like it holds water? Truth. Garland McRae the third says, "Just curious, would you consider yourself religious or spiritual?" I would consider myself religious, not spiritual. Peanut says, "Oh, it dropped to the bottom. Wait a minute. Okay." Peanut says, "What is your take on the statement that God cannot be all good and all powerful too?" I think that it's short-sighted, and that people who often quote that are usually quoting from some sort of like Google image. They're usually like the mouth-breathing atheists who think that this one quote that they heard at like 12 is this great revelation when it's like, yeah. I don't know, it's kind of like someone quoting Iron Man and then thinking that it's deep. That's kind of how I think of the quote, where God is good because he gave us free will, and evil exists because of our free will, where, he's given us this rule book, and unfortunately, because of one angel's pride, which is very easy to encounter because all he wanted initially was to become God, um, he now entered into humanity that same sin, which was pride, which was the original sin. And from that sin was birthed all of these different sins, whether it be lust, which is also a symptom of pride, where you worship your own body and your own hedonistic pleasure above the well-being of any someone else, making them have to serve you, which is what you see in a lot of these sort of, you know, very superficial and toxic relationships where there's one person who's emotionally committed and wanting something long lasting and fruitful, but their idea of love is now being corrupted because of another person who's really only using them for either their own physical or emotional gratification, yada yada yada, basically. So no, I think that the statement is very short-sighted. My favorite comedy, In Bruges, came to mind with Colin Firth and or Colin Farrell and Ray Fiennes. Let's see. Maddie says, "Where do you recommend to work if you don't necessarily like to work with people?" I mean, the question really is, do you not like to work with people, or do you not like to work with people, with certain types of people? So, for example, I don't know, like, I'm sure you would probably get along with people if you're more introverted, in a more bookshop oriented, library oriented, music oriented spot, things that are more acclimated to people who are a little more withdrawn, a little more relaxed, less type A personality, more type B personality, a little less intense, more respectful of quiet time. I wouldn't necessarily say those types of jobs just because it can be a little difficult to get those type of jobs, but kind of understanding your personality, the types of people that you can work properly with, because you naturally always have to work with other people to remain healthy because we're social creatures, and that way you don't get so isolated, and then see where you would naturally fall, basically. You definitely wouldn't wanna work in, like, a high-paced business setting versus working in a more relaxed library setting is my point. I'm not saying work at the library, but I'm saying figure out what types of jobs are more type B or type A personalities, what type of instincts you have, what type of, are you more head oriented? Are you more heart oriented? And kind of add up those pieces to see where you might land career wise. Misty Yancey Boyes says, "Do you believe there's a literal hell that is an everlasting lake of fire?" I think that's more Catholic. I think the Orthodox perspective on hell is different. I haven't really asked about it, but from what I understand, it's more like Hades, where I don't know for sure, but I don't think people stay forever in the Orthodox definition of hell. I think they're just kind of like meant to work their way out of it, but I don't quite know, honestly. I don't think that people with a heart inscribed once again with Christ would go to hell. And I think that innocent beings don't go to hell either. That's the Orthodox perspective. Catholics might have a different perspective on that, hence why there's disagreements with me there. Um, but yeah, I'm like, the idea of hell isn't that interesting to me. The most that I have of hell is basically that if you don't want anything to do with God and you want to live self indulgently and you want to do whatever it is that you want to do, then hell is basically the place where God is not. And wherever God is not is basically subject to that same mode of thinking, which is I want to live for myself, do whatever I want at the expense of whoever. And hell is basically the place to be if you want to live that way, because it's literally filled with people and entities that were like, I want to become that God. And it's like, there you go. Like, God gave us free will. He's not going to force you to be with him if you don't want to be with him. He's not going to force you to serve him if you don't want to serve him. He only wants people who can see the value of his rules, who can see the value of his like warnings and humble themselves before him. If you don't want to do that, like that's literally the place to be, but it's just like he warns you no one wants to be there because you're going to be dealing with the worst quality people and spirits possible. People who basically call it a day. But once again, thank you guys for tuning in and keeping me company this evening. Um, Moist Salt says, do you agree sin beliefs or religion should go by person instead of church general? Person to person instead of the church general religious members? I think you're asking is, do I believe that religion should be more of an individualist perspective or a more communal perspective or structured traditional way? Which I kind of interpret as being like, do I believe in a more esoteric perspective on Christianity or exoteric perspective on Christianity? And it's the latter. I believe more in an exoteric perspective. I think that there's times where you can have difficulty or misunderstanding or friction with tradition or with a structured authority, which is natural. But I think you run into way more problems if you try to rely on an individual's understanding of anything. You have to watch Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I love that movie. I love, love, love that movie. We'll have him jumping, running, dancing. That one's yeah, that one's a good comedy. Let's see. Will you read more Orthodox prayers? Maybe. Sometimes I feel motivated to do it. So yeah, maybe. Do you like Turner Classic Movies? I love them. Let's see. T.O. Turner says, where do I work if I've got a bad ankle? Maybe as a cashier for like a petting zoo. I don't know. I feel like that would be a good environment to work. That's like minimum wage, but that's the easiest job I can imagine getting that still has like a positive environment where you're just kind of like, I don't know, in an interesting field that isn't so retail and where you get to see kids having fun and being interactive without having to necessarily move. Will we ever get another Weenie Hut General video? Yes. Thoughts on the UK? Yeah. I think you guys have been screwed since pretty much 1200 AD. Like, ever since that Tudor dynasty came in, things just have always been built, wow, with mud and rocks, and it's kind of always meant to fall apart. Same thing with the United States. I kind of think it was always meant to fall apart. It's like, yeah, the principles within the country don't really hold water. It's like you can't mix enlightenment with Christianity, as the United States tried. Likewise, you can't mix nationalism or secularism with religion, as Henry VIII did. Do you make your bed when you leave for work? I try to. Um, okay. Last question. Thoughts on monarchy? I like it. I like it a lot. I think any girl loves monarchy. Hence, Disney princesses, obsessions with queens. It's just like there's always been that idea of like, what figurehead can we look up to kind of gain direction and go that route? I don't know. I just like monarchy for a lot of reasons, but just to kind of leave it on a short, superficial note, that's it. So, yeah. Anyways, I'm going to be ending the stream now. Thank you guys once again for joining me, and I'll see you at 100K, I guess, if we reach it, I suppose. So, yeah. Take care and happy slumbers. Bye-bye now.